Alright, welcome back, Card Knock Life Plays. It's been a while since we've done one of these. I came across this deck here by Surfcat, which was just merely listed as white, black, green. I said, oh, what the heck is that? It's only 46 tickets to build, and to my surprise, it happened to be an Abzan Aristocrats or Abzan token style deck, much like the one that Sam Black has been playing for quite some time now. So I threw this together, and I've played a couple of Q games with it just to kind of get some experience with it. But now I'm going to go through a league, and we're going to record the games in the league and see how it plays out. So this is a look at Surfcat's deck. I made a couple of changes to mine based on some deficiencies I saw, and just basically based on my own play style. So notably, Surfcat has a couple of Lost Legacy in the sideboard. I cut those almost entirely, which was maybe a mistake. I don't like playing these types of cards in general unless they're really called for. And at this point in the meta, things haven't quite settled out to the point where I feel like I need to be Lost Legacying things. The biggest problem for this deck is like when the opponent just starts dropping crazy planeswalkers. So I could see this calling out like a Nico Bolas at some point, but in a lot of those decks with Nico Bolas, there's just so much more going on than if I hit a Nico Bolas, I'm going to be just faced with a Chandra or, you know, a Liliana or something that's just going to kill me anyway. Let's take a look at my list here. I'm going to shrink it down for you, and I apologize for the lack of preparedness on that there. Let's see. So what I did was, at first I tried without the Angel of Sanctions. That's one of the most expensive cards in the deck. If you want to really, really do a budget deck, Angel of Sanctions and Blooming Marsh is really where you're going to end up paying the money for this one. But overall, it's pretty affordable for a standard deck, and it's pretty competitive for a standard deck. Like I said, Angel of Sanctions cannot be done without, so we'll talk about that in a moment. Here's my main deck. It looks pretty straightforward. It's very similar to like a bunch of draft cards that you're used to playing in limited events. In fact, you get a lot of very limited like environments when you're playing this deck because you have tons of moments where you just have stalemates of really small, dirtly creatures that are just staring each other down and you can't get through. That's where Driven to Despair comes in, which basically is the upgrade that we get from Hour of Devastation for this deck. Driven says, until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample, and when they deal damage to a player, draw a card. So, trample is not super relevant since almost all of our creatures are 1 power, but we do have cards like Shefet Dunes, which can pump all our creatures, +1/+1, so the trample might be relevant in that case, though paying 4, 5, 6, 7 mana to do that is usually hard to come by without tapping a lot of your creatures down from Cryptolith Rites. But the other side of this card is the most important part, Despair, the Aftermath. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain Menace, which helps them to get through in those stalemate situations. Whenever they deal combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. Against some control decks which like to stockpile cards and maybe are trying to get up to 6 mana to play a Torrential Gearhulk, this could come at exactly the right time to blast through and strike them down. Now, another interesting thing about this deck is Warping Wail is pretty functional in here because Hashep Ruins and Shefet Oasis, or Shefet Dunes, I should say, both add colorless mana to your mana pool, as does the one waste that I can search for with Evolving Wilds, as does Westvale Abbey, which I have added to the list. I felt like the deck needed a Westvale Abbey. Warping Wail is basically live in all cases, though. The sorcery counter is really important versus things like the card Hour of Devastation, anything that's like a board wipe, like an Infest type of card that's going to kill all of our creatures. We need to be able to deal with that. But also, instant speed, putting Eldrazi Scion token into play is a big deal as well. If you can instant speed that at end of turn, pop a dude into play, he can tap for mana on your next turn with Cryptolith Rites. You can sacrifice it to Hidden Stockpile and get some more tokens out of that and maybe Anointed Procession. It has a lot of functions. Before I go any further, I should really talk about this. If you're not familiar with the deck, this is the main idea with the deck. It looks like a bunch of bad cards, and it is, but when paired with cards like Anointed Procession, which puts twice the number of tokens into play, and Hidden Stockpile, which basically allows you to put a token into play every turn, and Scry, you can really get out of hand quickly, and you can really swarm the board, which is why Westvale Abbey fits pretty perfectly into this deck. The only trick is making it work with the 3 mana colors. So I haven't had any problems with that. In fact, every time I've drawn Westvale Abbey, I've been more than pleased with it. I've just basically been able to drop it and flip it right away, and it's been really cool. So I actually put one more on the sideboard as well. So let's take a look at the sideboard. Oh, one more quick note, Anointer Priest. This is like the most suspect looking card in the deck. This card is insane. Do not be surprised when it just takes over the game. Creature token enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. So it's kind of like a bad Soul Warden. But it's better because it's a 1/3, so it can actually block some things in the early game. But the Embalm cost, 3 and a white, is really cool when you have Anointed Procession on the field, because you'll trigger Anointed Procession, get 2 Embalm Anointer Priests, and you'll gain 4 life there, and then you'll just start the ball rolling from that point. Imagine that you have Sacred Cat in the graveyard. Every time you play 2 Sacred Cats, it's going to trigger Anointed Priest twice. Things go crazy. Alright, sideboard. So this is pretty similar to the sideboard that Surfcat posted, but again, I made some changes. Sunscourge Champion was from his original list. When you need more life gain, this guy's there for you. This is one of the cheapest Eternalized costs in the game. And discarding a card, you can usually hold on to a land to pitch for that, so that's pretty cool. Angel of Sanctions is really a necessary evil. Like I said, I wanted to cut it to see if I could make this deck more budget in order to, sort of promote it in that way. But it can't be done. This is like maybe a 4-ticket card, so it's not going to break the bank anyway. But Angel of Sanctions deals with non-land permanents in opponent control. So while it seems like a card that just comes into play and exiles a creature, truly it's going to take care of the planeswalkers more often than not and provide a valuable flying blocker. So you really, really need this guy. Not to mention the 5 and a white Embalm cost works pretty well with cards like Anointed Procession, where you're going to get 2 Angel of Sanctions tokens and exile 2 permanents. Now we have a couple Fatal Push, because sometimes you just need more creature removal. Dreamstealer is pretty cool. This card has Menace, and when it deals damage to a player, that player discards that many cards. There was a card like this. There's some kind of Spectre that basically did this back in the day. This guy's much cooler because he has 4 and 2 black Eternalize, in which case he comes in as a 4/4 Menace, and is going to cause him to discard 4 cards. So he's really, really potent against like control-style decks where they're not running a ton of creatures, and it's going to cost them 2 removal spells to deal with him, unless they have a Magma Spray, of course. So he's been really good in that case. What's hard is trying to find things to take out for a full 4 Dreamstealer. So I'm thinking that, like, as good as this guy is, I think it might be fair to like go down to 3 of him, and just have more room for other stuff in the sideboard. Warping Wail, we have another one of those because of the fact that we are going to need to deal with some sorcery speed sweepers. When we are faced with that kind of deck, we're going to want all 4 of them. We are running, let's see if I can move some things around here, Dusk to Dawn in the sideboard for obvious interactions with our, the tiny creatures that we've got in this deck, as well as the 4 mana remove all 3 power or greater creatures, which is everything that we don't have, and that's awesome. And then I've added this myself, and this is Appeal to Authority, and I think this card fits pretty perfectly in this deck, similar to the way that Driven to Despair does. Appeal gives your creature trample and +X/+X, so that'll break the stalemate pretty well, and for only 1 mana. And then Authority is pretty relevant in that it can tap 2 creatures that are going to be blocking, but it also gives my guys Vigilance, so I can attack in and then tap for mana on Cryptolith Rites afterwards, which is kind of cool. So there aren't too many times where you really need that to happen. Most of the time, Authority is just going to help your guys get in at the cost of just 2 mana, which is really cheap, and that's kind of what this deck needs in those Alpha Strike situations. Again, Westvale Abbey I brought in because the card's just so good in some cases. There's some games where you just need to get a flyer over top to like actually do something. A lot of the ways I win is I go to time in this deck, where my opponent goes to time in this deck. And so there's not a lot of oomph to it other than just overwhelming them, having like 60 life at the end of the game, and they just like can't handle the situation. They run out of the clock. So Westvale Abbey provides a really big beater out of nowhere that fits really well in the deck. Alright, so we're going to run a few games with this and see how it goes. Thanks for watching.